Good morning, everybody. Well, I suppose by now most of the folks have kind of caught on that we changed our clocks ahead. And I suppose there's going to be a few of those stragglers who will be coming here to St. Patrick's in about 45 minutes or so, wondering, what's going on? Did they change the Mass schedule or what? No. Okay. Anyway, here it is, the second Sunday of Lent. And we've got just a spectacular gospel. It's the gospel of the transfiguration of Jesus, and it really captures the human imagination. Here it is. Jesus tells Peter and James and John, he says, I want you to come with me because I am going to show you something that is really spectacular. And Peter probably wonders, what could it be? Maybe it's a miracle of some kind. Maybe he's going to say something really important or something like that. And so they sort of take a hike. And they take a hike up this really steep mountain. The mountain's name is Mount Tabor. And it's actually there. It's kind of an extinct volcano. Very impressive. Everything's flat, and all of a sudden there's this huge mountain right there in the middle of the flatness of Galilee. So they climb up there. And no doubt Peter was the oldest of all of them, kind of out of breath, and thinks to himself, why are we going up to the mountain anyway? Couldn't you just do this there by the Sea of Galilee? But no. Okay, so they get up there. And as they're there, they're looking at Jesus, and wow. As they peer into his face begins to glow. And it gets brighter and brighter and brighter. And as it does that, his face eventually becomes as bright as the sun itself. And as all of this transformation is occurring, all of a sudden his garments, his robe there, it also takes on this translucent splendor as it begins to glow and glow. And eventually it becomes as white as the light itself. And it's just bright. And their eyes, they're trying to shelter their eyes as they see this fantastic luminescent figure in front of them. And as that happens, all of a sudden, these two figures, they just sort of begin to materialize on either side of Jesus. Peter, James, and John, they begin to recognize these people. Well, it looks like Moses, and it looks like Elijah. Of course, they would know Moses. Moses is the one to whom God gave the Ten Commandments. Moses is the one who led the children of Israel from the slavery of Egypt to the promised land. And so they begin to recognize, well, that's Moses. You know, Moses, we're not so sure exactly how he died. We don't really have any record how he died, where he died, or even when he's buried. So there's this kind of this nebulous cloud over the end of Moses' life. On the other hand, Elijah, who's standing there on the other side, Elijah never died. Actually, the story from the book of Kings is that this fiery chariot just swoops down from heaven, it grabs Elijah, and off he goes into the sky, and this fiery thing, that's the last time they saw him. So here, these two figures, they kind of hint at eternal life, resurrection. And as they're there, Jesus is they're having a discussion of some kind. Jesus and Moses and Elijah. And I always like to think that Peter, being the curious person that he was, he wanted to know what they were saying. I bet he was trying to eavesdrop and listen to what they're saying. Anyway, leave it to Peter. He was so much like himself. In this splendid moment, all of a sudden, he says something stupid. Yeah, this is what he says. He says, wow, he says, this is just fantastic. And then he says, I think what we'll do is he says, I'm going to build a tent. One for you, Jesus, one for Elijah, and one for Moses. And then we'll just stay here forever. I mean, what kind of a response is that to something like that? Well, that was Peter's response. And anyway, as he's saying this, it gets even more awesome. What happens is this real thick, bright cloud begins to condense right over this theophany, this phenomenon. And then from the cloud, they hear this thunderous, booming kind of voice that goes like this. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. And that's way too much for them. That's way too much for them. They sort of hit the ground, they cover their eyes, and they think, uh-oh, how could this be happening? Is this a dream or what? And then what happens? You're told in the story, Jesus comes in, he says, Peter, it's time to get up. And as Peter gazes up, Jesus is there just like normal. His face doesn't glow like the sun. His garments are just ordinary and everything. And he says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And then they go down the mountain. And as they're going down the mountain, Jesus looks at Peter and he says, Peter, I want you to keep this a secret, okay? What you just saw, until the Son of Man rises from the dead. That must have been kind of odd because Peter must have thought, what is this rising from the dead anyway? In the story, we have this magnificent transfiguration where the splendor and the glory of God sort of shines through Jesus' human body. During these Lenten days, as we ourselves kind of prepare ourselves for Easter, it's a time for transformation for you and for me as well. And actually, our scripture readings for today, they present two figures to us of people who were transformed by the grace and the power of God. Now, if you listen to that first reading, we had a reading from the book of Genesis about a man whose name is Abraham. And God says to Abraham, he says he's living in a foreign land, a place called Haran, actually, which is somewhere located by Iran in Iraq. And he's there with his family and all of his animals and everything. And God says, Abraham, I want you to pack everything up and I want you to go to the land that I'm going to show you. Because if you do that, your descendants will be, well, as numerous as the stars of the sky and as numerous as the grains of sand on the seashore. And you know what? Without asking any questions or anything, Abraham says, I'll do it. I'll do what you ask of me, Lord. And he does. He begins his journey, his trek to the west, which eventually will end up in the promised land. And God promises him, he says, Abraham, you will be the father of a great people. You will be the father of a great nation. And your descendants will just be numerous. And then you get to the hard part of the story. Abraham, he has a son by the name of Isaac. And Abraham sees in that person the fulfillment of God's promise. This is my descendant. This is how this is going to happen. And you know what happens? God says, now I want you to give him back to me. He must have thought, how's this going to work anyway? I only have one descendant, and you made a promise to me, and now you're taking him back. How can this be? Well, Abraham is our father in the faith. He trusted God and his word. If you notice in the story, this transformation kind of takes place. And then what happens is God changes his name from Abram to Abraham to signify here is the transformation of this man who eventually becomes the father of a great nation. Well, in the second reading, we have the letter from Paul to Timothy. You know a lot about Paul. His name was Saul of Tarsus, and he was an avid persecutor of the early church because he saw in the early Christians the threat to the Jewish faith. And his response was, get rid of them. The story goes like this. He's on his way to a town called Damascus, and wow, right out of the blue, there's this bright light. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe 30, 60, 90 seconds. And in that bright light, he experiences the risen Christ. And in that moment, he experiences a fundamental transformation. Because in that moment, Paul has to reevaluate everything that he believed to be true. He had to reevaluate all of his priorities and all of his values in that single moment. And from that moment on, it's described as his conversion, everything in his life changed. And eventually he becomes the apostle to the Gentiles. And God changes his name from Saul of Tarsus to Paul to signify that transformation. When we talk about transformation and transfiguration, there really is kind of a difference in those words. Jesus, in being transfigured, he was changed from the inside out. So in other words, what happened in Jesus is the glory of God, the splendor of his divinity, which was inside of him, in some sense emerges out and it changes. It changes his body, the appearance of his body, from the inside. The glory of God, the splendor and majesty of God literally transfigures his human body. For us, we're not transfigured. We're more along the lines of, we're kind of transformed. Transformation is something that takes place, that God does from the outside inward. We are changed by the grace and the power of God. And that's kind of what happens here during our Lenten journey, is hopefully in these days of Lent that we are opening ourselves to the power and the grace of God to be transformed. The starting point for transformation is this, and we got the example of Abraham and Paul, is an openness to being transformed by God. You have to ask yourself a couple of simple questions. Am I satisfied with my life the way it is right now? Am I satisfied with my life just the way that it's going? Do I really want to be transformed by the grace and the power of God? Am I satisfied with everything just maintaining itself the way it is? Or do I want to thrive in my spiritual life? Do I want to really, truly be alive? That's the starting point. Abraham had an openness to being transformed, and he became the father of a great nation. Paul had that openness in the moment of his conversion to transformation, and he becomes the apostle to the Gentiles. That's the starting point for you and for me as well. The desire, Lord, transform me. I want to thrive. I want to be truly, truly alive. Second thing is this. Now, if you've been reading that Matthew Kelly book that you got here, hopefully on Ash Wednesday or last Sunday, Resisting Happiness, there are 4 words that are extremely important and critical for transformation. Now, if you've been reading that book, you know what those words are. Thy will be done. You know, there's something inside of us where there's a tension or a conflict that exists between my will be done and God's will be done. Because somehow we've got the notion that my life belongs to me and I'll plan it out and do what I think is best for me. But you got to remember this. God has a plan for all of our lives. God has a design for your life, and that design is his will for you. And in order to begin this transformation, there has to be the openness to say, Lord, I want your will to be done inside of me. I want to know what your plan is, and I want that plan, and I want that design in my life for the transformation of my life. Anyway, here we are. Here's the gospel challenge for this week. Kind of a simple one. At the beginning here of our Mass, you had a little video by a priest by the name of Father Martin on prayer. So this is kind of the challenge for this week. Carve out maybe 5 or 10 minutes of quiet time. Settle yourself down. Be aware of your presence. Be aware of God's presence. Be aware of your spirit and your soul. And begin this way. Lord, I want to be transformed. Ponder what God's will or design is for you. Let God's heart speak to your heart to begin the transformation. Saint Teresa of Calcutta made this observation. She said this, it's in the silence of God's presence to us that there is the possibility for renewal and transformation. So here we are. We're beginning the second full week of Lent. We've already got 1 week behind us, and we've got like 5 more weeks to go, folks. So I hope that your Lenten discipline is going well. And this Sunday, this week, we're challenged with transformation. And we hear the story of Jesus' transfiguration. The glory and majesty of God just transfigures him. And we hear the stories of transformation of Abraham and Paul. And think about it this way. We've got like the next 5 weeks to go. And if God can do great things in the life of Abraham, if he can do great things in the life of St. Paul, you just use your imagination and think, what can God do in your life?